When I heard about the Nepal earthquake, I thought I would look into it. Um, Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about natural disasters. The UN, the powers that be, have mentioned that we're entering a phase of the world when there is going to be instability, there are going to be more earthquakes, more tsunamis. I think as a curious person, what is interesting is to determine to what extent these things are naturally caused and to what extent they might be caused or propagated by the weapons and the facilities for altering the climate and altering the electromagnetic nature of the world. Um, so one of the things that's mentioned quite frequently is Haarp. So the first thing I did was I looked to see if there was any evidence connecting the Nepal earthquake with Haarp. I couldn't find very much. But as I started digging around, I did find out quite a lot of interesting information surrounding the Nepal earthquake, so I thought I would share that with you today. Firstly, I must say, obviously, I'm devastated by the earthquake. Um, I'm just also interested in searching for truth. For me, it's not enough just to, feel terribly sorry for these people. I'd also like to know what's behind it all. So with that in mind, I did a little bit of digging. Now, one of the first things I discovered was that it was remarked in the newspapers that a week before the Nepal earthquake, there was a delegation of scientists who were visiting the Himalayas and assessing whether there was likely to be an earthquake there. Now, this seemed to be quite coincidental, that seeing as they haven't had an earthquake or a serious earthquake for like decades, that a week before they have a serious earthquake, there would be this delegation of scientists. So I looked to see who was actually visiting to see if I could find out any more information. The only two people that were mentioned in the article were firstly a company called Geophysical, which are based in California, and secondly a company called Earthquakes Without Frontiers. Bit of a scary title, that one, isn't it? So first of all, I looked at Geophysical. Now, Geophysical is seems to be fronted by a guy called Hari Kumar. I did a bit of digging on Hari Kumar. He has a few blogs and things. Some of his blogs were a bit suspect, to be honest, but some of the others he seemed to be quite interested in: physics, particle physics, dark matter, string theory. I think these are sort of his own blogs rather than the company's. The company is a company that works on assessing risks in earthquake areas, and they'd recently done a project in the Himalayas. So whether it was part of that project that they were there, I don't know. I looked to see who funded Geohazards, and interestingly, their champion funder is a company called Oyo, which is a Japanese company. Oyo is described as an earthquake disaster mitigation company. So perhaps they're the kind of company that could come in after a disaster and perhaps look at rebuilding the ergonomics of a city or whatever. So an interesting partnership there between a company that assesses the risks and then one that might go in after an earthquake has taken place. Oyo, interestingly, also seems to do quite a lot of earthquake assessment work as well. And when I clicked on their page, it said that they do profiling and testing and scientific work on sites to test for things like resistivity profiling. So that will be how much resistance there is in the earth to forces which might cause an earthquake. They also do something which is easier for me to understand called rock strength testing. You know, blast the rocks, how strong are they, I guess. These things are obviously done, and then they advise the communities and the governments, and obviously they get paid for this. This is big business. So that company Oyo, that Japanese one, that does work both before and after an earthquake. The other company that was mentioned as having visited with the delegation of scientists that were in Nepal a week before was a company called Earthquakes Without Frontiers. And they seem to be involved in quite big projects. And they, as far as I'm aware, have only had one project which they've been taking forward since 2013. And interestingly, that project has been in Nepal. Their next project, which is starting very soon, is in China. There's a guy called James Jackson that leads this project, and he's also an advisor for geohazards as well. He's on their website. On the newspaper article which mentioned all of these scientists coming to Nepal, it talked about the work that geohazards and Earthquakes Without Frontiers do. I think Earthquakes Without Frontiers had been, amongst other things, involved in talking to hospitals about how they could cope with emergencies. But one of the things that these companies mentioned was they mentioned about how the whole infrastructure was really not geared up to earthquakes. You know, they said, oh, the houses are built in the wrong way. People build on another story when their son is getting married, and it's all very unstable. And interestingly, they also talked about the population density and the likelihood of how many people would die given an earthquake disaster. And they assessed that in Nepal, that possibly 1,000 people per square mile would die in an earthquake. And they also assessed that in some parts of the world, such as Iran, China and India, that because the population was a lot higher, that actually 10,000 people per square mile would die in those circumstances. There didn't seem to be any correlation with Haarp, but when I started looking, a few people on YouTube had mentioned Cern. Now, Cern is an interesting thing because I don't know about you, but my perception of Cern was that it was a physics research facility. They were doing interesting stuff about relativity and matter and so on and so forth. Apparently it's been turned off for a while, and it had just been turned on prior to the Nepal earthquake. When it was turned on again, it was actually 60% more powerful than it had ever been before. Apparently, whatever research it's doing, it is actually quite dangerous because Professor Stephen Hawking was on record as saying that he thought the search for the Higgs boson was potentially one of the greatest threats that the world has ever known. I think this is because the antimatter, which is basically the sort of Higgs boson thing, sorry I'm a bit vague on this because I'm not a physicist, but the antimatter particle that they're looking for, if it meets with the particle, it can cause combustion. So it is potentially a very dangerous thing. The history of Cern is quite interesting because it seems to link very much with something that I've become aware of only very recently, which is with the sort of ancient cultures, what you might call satanic link with a lot of the elite institutions. Now we can see this in Cern in several ways. The most principal way is that when they inaugurated Cern, which is actually on the site of the ancient city of Apolliacum, they inaugurated it with a statue and a dedication to the god Shiva. The god Shiva is the god or goddess of destruction who dances the dance of destruction. And this statue was erected and inaugurated in 2004. And I'm not sure if it was then or more recently, but there is also a video which features Shiva's dance of destruction. Now there is a connection between Shiva and Nepal. In fact, 80% of people in Nepal are worshippers of Shiva, and Nepal has some of the most historic World Heritage sites which are dedicated to Shiva in the world. It's a very, very important site for Shiva. Also, it's rather a sacred time for Nepal because every 5 years Nepal has a large blood ritual sacrifice which is dedicated to Shiva, and this had just taken place in November 2014 as part of the 5-year cycle. So if you were to have the mindset of a Satanist, which I don't, but I'm quite interested in how they think, then you could say that the ground was ritually prepared with blood. The area where the earthquake took place was very related to the goddess of Shiva, which their whole facility is dedicated to. Now, the other thing which could just be coincidence, but is rather interesting, is the fact that the Cern facility had been turned off, and it was turned on 1 or 2 days, I think, before the first earthquake came in Nepal. At the exact point when the earthquake occurred, there had been a lot of very high power beams, and it actually peaked. I don't fully understand it all, but there is another video on YouTube, and it apparently peaked with these particular booms at exactly the same time that the earthquake occurred in Nepal. So it does look as though there may be some sort of correlation there. Now, obviously, there has been another earthquake a few days later. Obviously, there's been aftershocks, which have been smaller, but there's been another major earthquake. At that time, Cern wasn't on, so whether there's a relationship with Cern or not, I don't know. I would have thought logically that if Cern had created the geological environment for the earthquake to take place, that it could have also caused the second one without necessarily being turned on, but I don't know. Obviously, we're not going to get any help, so this is all a matter of conjecture, really. I'm just throwing up a few ideas that people might be interested in. There are also, at the moment, there are big changes to the Earth's magnetic field. Now, those people who are investigating this say that there is definitely seems to be a phase in terms of the universe of the Earth's magnetism becoming weaker, and the magnetism between the poles of the Earth actually shifting, and this phenomenon is definitely occurring. What we don't fully understand is the extent to which this is man-made, because obviously facilities like Haarp and like Cern and like geoengineering are having a big impact, and we don't also know the extent to which this is a natural feature of the universe and the universe's natural cycles throughout time. But what we can say is that that is a dangerous thing, and that is the thing that is contributing towards these sort of disasters. It seems to be kind of natural disaster time at the moment, and promotion is the wrong word, but obviously the companies I mentioned are getting involved. They're having a financial input into providing training, presumably at large cost, then providing the aftercare, presumably to fairly large payment. It was also interesting, there was another article in the paper about rescue at Nepal, and an American woman who'd been hiding in a cave for 5 days. What had happened was, I think after about the second day, a Japanese helicopter or a Japanese plane had come by. I don't know whether that was Oyo or somebody else. They'd refused to pick her up because she was from the US. They'd disappeared, so they had to stay there a bit longer in the cave, surviving on food and water. Then a Jewish company came along. Apparently several Jewish insurance companies flew out people to Nepal, but the Jewish company wouldn't pick up anybody that didn't have holiday insurance, so they wouldn't pick her up either. And finally she was actually picked up by somebody from the US. So it does seem that there is rather an industry surrounding these things. And it was interesting when I was listening to a guy called Vince, who's from New Zealand, and he was talking about the Christchurch earthquake. Now, the earthquake in Christchurch, there's a few parallels there, because prior to the earthquake taking place, there was a big delegation of people from the United States, statesmen. There was also a visit from the United States of somebody from FEMA, the Federal Emergencies Board or whatever. 2 hours before the earthquake took place, all of the US delegates disappeared on a plane, so they weren't involved in the earthquake at all. The person from the Federal Emergencies Unit didn't disappear, they stayed and helped to orchestrate the cleanup. Now, obviously, the earthquake in Christchurch, there was 185 dead, not nearly so many dead, but the whole of the historic city was absolutely devastated. A huge devastation of a very beautiful and sort of large historic place. Now, interestingly, the federal government were appointed effectively to supply all of the rebuilding. In fact, they sort of had the project work and the money supplied for that, because they were part of a very big company which they virtually owned, which was called Fletcher Construction. Sorry, I'm just getting my piece of paper here. So they actually managed to pick up the work for that, which was probably paid them quite well. Their Haarp was implicated in the Christchurch earthquake, because there is a Haarp facility very close to Christchurch. For those of you that don't know what Haarp is electro frequencies, like electro wave frequencies. It actually manifests itself almost like sound, and it's a military technology that's developed from the research of Tesla, the scientist who wanted to create free electromagnetic energy for the world. And basically a lot of his research has been geared into this thing called Haarp, which is effectively a very powerful weapon. It can cause earthquakes, it can cause all sorts of things, and the military is quite cagey really about why exactly we have it. There may be some positive effects of it, I don't know, but it has been shown that it can cause earthquakes. It's been demonstrated by scientists. So this facility was very close to Christchurch. As I say, when the facility is used, it can manifest itself as sound, and 40 very powerful sonic booms were heard in the vicinity of Christchurch around the time of the earthquake, which led people to think that possibly it was implicated. FEMA, the US, coordinated the research relief effort, and in fact the deaths were very much mitigated, partly for two reasons. One was that, interestingly, by coincidence, there was also a very, very large doctors' convention that was taking place in Christchurch that day with 250 doctors, who were all extra doctors who were able to be used to care for the wounded. The other interesting thing, probably a coincidence, was that 2,000 extra troops were also around in Christchurch that day, and they'd been doing a special disaster drill. They were doing some kind of disaster drill the day before, or in the few hours before the earthquake actually occurred. Once the earthquake had occurred, they were drafted in to help with the cleaning up. The only other thing I will mention with respect to the whole earthquake scenarios is that the United Nations seems to be very into the idea of telling us that disasters and earthquakes and tsunamis are stuff that is going to be happening to us, and as well as having these companies which are providing training and cleaning up at great cost to the taxpayer, of course. They're also educating the children. Now, my local school here at the moment, this term, they're studying disasters, natural disasters, and I just looked at some of the options. There are project options for the children, some of the projects that the children can do, these children. It says, write a comic strip about an earthquake, a tsunami or a hurricane, or create your own design for a village that could survive near a volcano. Presumably you'd be taking into account the kind of designs that the geohazards would be looking at when they talked about tall houses that would fall down. Oh, no, 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 we don't want those. We want to rebuild nice, strong houses that aren't going to fall down. You know, in fact, we might be able to find you a supplier, but never mind. Where's the best place in the world to live to avoid being caught in a natural disaster? That's one of the questions to the children. Well, it really depends on your viewpoint, doesn't it? Well, you know, hopefully here is quite good, but who knows? Ask your friends what they find the most interesting: volcanoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, or earthquakes. Make a tally chart and display your findings in a bar chart. Well, I suppose that one demands a little bit of mathematics, but I'm not really sure about the subject matter. I think it's very debatable. So there we go. That's the United Nations with their training for children to go alongside. And interestingly, when I clicked on Google earlier today, I noticed that Google has these little like images. They're usually quite sort of horrible. I probably should use another browser really, but I haven't got around to it. And the one that's on today is particularly horrible. It's like a sort of dark, horrible dark background with a sort of dark earth in the middle. Like some of the things I've seen on the pictures actually from Cern, interestingly, this dark earth. And then when I clicked on Google and searched for something, I noticed that at the side of the screen there was a little logo with Google, and it had taken the two O's and it had split them to make an O look like the world that had been cracked in half. And I thought, that's really weird, that looks like an earthquake. And when I hovered my mouse over it, it actually said celebrating the 127th birthday of Inge Lehmann. And I thought, who's Inge Lehmann? So I clicked on Wikipedia and I looked up to see who Inge Lehmann was. And Inge Lehmann was a female scientist who was investigating earthquakes and seismic changes, and actually sort of discovered the idea of the difference between the Earth's core and the middle of the Earth, and how it all went along. So there we go, more things connected with earthquakes. Seem to be on a bit of an earthquake mode at the moment. Just finally going back to Cern, there was a little bit more information I didn't tell you, that 2015, this isn't necessarily connected to Cern, but it's something that Cern is celebrating, is being celebrated as the year of light, the year of the light bringer. Now, the light bringer in sort of what you might call Satanism parlance is actually Lucifer, and the picture in Cern is of a big sort of fire, and the Luciferians, and a lot of them are the top corporations, which are all seem to follow this philosophy, and I'm afraid it's not doing us a lot of good at all. And I'm just bringing this to light now. And for them, bringing light isn't about bringing love or bringing kindness, it's about bringing fire. So this picture is a big fire. And interestingly, that links in with things like the Olympic torches. When they have the Olympics, they have the Olympic torch. That is very much a Satanistic sign, and the torch represents Lucifer, which is it's kind of the devil in this sort of ancient religion. It sounds a bit weird because I find the whole thing quite spooky and distasteful, and I don't, I was always taught that you shouldn't be superstitious, but there seems no doubt when you look at these people with their statues and their funny days of the week and their numerology and all of these things that the top elites do, that they're very much following some kind of blueprint of some sort of very esoteric but also quite evil thing. So the fact that it's the year of Lucifer probably isn't going to bode terribly well for the rest of us. Cern has also got another little project going, which I thought I'd tell you about, which is that they're opening another branch of their lab, which is going to be in the Middle East. And this is called Sesame. Now, some people reckon that the Satanists are wanting to open the portal to the other worlds through Cern. I don't know. But anyway, open sesame seems to sort of be a fairly kind of like magical sort of term. So Sesame is going to be in the Middle East, and it's going to give work to Middle Eastern scientists. It's going to do similar work to Cern, so we shall keep our fingers crossed that nothing too bad happens there, as well as developing science. The aim of Sesame is to promote peace in the region. So all I can say about that is that I hope it's not peace in the same way as the United Nations peacekeeping force.
Mirror, mirror, tell me what you see. I see a girl, that girl is me. Mirror, I'm as anxious as can be, and I feel like the world's come crashing down on me. Mirror, mirror, I feel such a fright, and I'm going out with him tonight. Don't worry, honey, it will be alright. We'll get you looking so beautiful. Spilled all my coffee, can't find my best jewelry. Got dirt in my fingernails, spots